Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. This week I had the pleasure of welcoming Dr. David Zgarrick, a professor emeritus of Northeastern University College of Pharmacy. Some of my favorite moments from the show, including hearing Dave share why he views the next phase of life after 30 plus years in academia, not as retirement, but rather as a preferment phase of his career, how and why he started planning financially early in his career to put himself in a position of having choice, and advice he has for new grads that are facing the financial headwind of many competing financial priorities, including student loan debt, buying a home, and saving for the future. Now, before we jump into the show, I recognize that many listeners may not be aware of what the team at YFP Planning does in working one-on-one with more than 280 households in 40 plus states. YFP Planning offers fee-only high-touch financial planning that is customized to the pharmacy professional. If you're interested in learning more about how working one-on-one with a certified financial planner may help you achieve your financial goals, you can book a free discovery call at yfpplanning.com. Whether or not YFP Planning's financial planning services are a good fit for you, know that we appreciate your support of this podcast and our mission to help pharmacists achieve financial freedom. Okay, let's jump into my interview with Professor Emeritus Dr. Dave Zgarrick. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Tim.
Well, I'm really excited to have you on to dig into your professional journey and the impact that finances has had throughout your journey, so that you could retire, or perhaps better said, as we'll talk about, take a halftime, break at the age of 57. And you and I have known each other for several years through the academic circles. And when I saw your post on LinkedIn about entering this next phase, I knew that your story would have such a great impact on our community. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really great to be here. And it's great to think about halftime. It was interesting. I'm a Green Bay Packers fan. You're a Buffalo Bills fan. Just thinking about halftime, we're about halfway through the NFL season. It's time to make some adjustments. And, I think both the Packers and Bills will have some adjustments to make. And so we can talk about how we make financial adjustments as well.
I love that. Let's start with your pharmacy career. When did that journey begin, and what drew you into the profession to begin with?
I'm from an interesting community. I'm from Marshfield, Wisconsin, which is a relatively small community in central Wisconsin. But it's a very unique community in that Marshfield has a very large medical center. It's the Marshfield Clinic. It has now the Marshfield Medical Center. I grew up with health and healthcare, even though no one in my family was a healthcare professional. My father was an administrator for a dairy corporation. My mother was an educator. She taught special education. So I was not brought up in a healthcare background, but I had lots of friends and knew lots of people that were in the healthcare space. And as I was going through high school, was thinking about health and healthcare a lot, and thinking about wanting to go down that pathway. I was, reasonably good at all the things they tell you you're supposed to be good at in high school: math and science and communications and all those things. I had honestly probably was thinking first about medicine at the time. I was going to go to medical school. I guess in some ways I was very fortunate. I went to a career day seminar, and one of the speakers that came to that career day seminar was someone from the University of Wisconsin School of Pharmacy, and talked a little bit about pharmacy and what pharmacists did and so forth. And pharmacy hit a good spot. And I'll give my parents credit. They were very pragmatic with me when it came to where are you going to go to college, and what are you going to major in college, and that kind of stuff. And they said, you can go to college anywhere you want, and you can major in anything you want, so long as you can support yourself when you're done. And to that end, pharmacy seemed like it was a great, at the time, keep in mind, it was a 5-year BS degree at the time, and which was a great fit, because in some ways I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to learn all these things that are going to help me if I go to medical school and become a physician. I'm going to learn a lot about drugs and a lot about health and healthcare and so forth. Worst case scenario, if I don't get into medical school, I can be a pharmacist and I'll be able to support myself. I'll say two things happened along the way. One, I recognized that being a physician wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and especially the pathway towards becoming a
Mm-hmm.
physician. It's not just medical school, of course; it's residency and training and everything
Mm-hmm.
that life brings. Um, and then I also learned that there's so much more to pharmacy than
Yes.
I had envisioned there was. Probably like many people, when you start down this path, growing up in central Wisconsin, honestly, my only connection with pharmacy was with community pharmacy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, saw people, primarily men wearing white coats working behind counters
Mm-hmm.
and seeing them take big bottles of pills and put them into little bottles of pills and didn't think that much more of it. Obviously, as I learned so much more about not only what the role of pharmacy was at that time, but what we were seeing it begin to
Yeah.
evolve towards, not just dispensing medications, of course, but really using our knowledge and expertise to help maximize the benefits from
Mm-hmm.
medication therapy. I was fortunate. I had some really good experiences along the way. I hooked up with folks that were doing research in a variety of different ways. I spent one summer doing medical research, working in a lab, and honestly said to myself, that's not what I wanted to do. But I spent more time doing research with social administrative scientists
Yeah.
and learning about the kinds of questions that they ask. My parents will tell you I am one of those people that always asked questions. I was one of those always kids that always asked, why?
Mm-hmm.
And, as you can imagine, parents, you being a parent yourself, you probably at a certain point, you just want to tell your kids, go figure it out
That's
yourself.
right.
And just honestly, that's what we do as
Mm-hmm.
researchers. We
Mm-hmm.
ask questions and we have the tools to be able to learn how to figure it out ourselves. So now, my questions I was very interested in asking were honestly about pharmacists themselves, the work they do, the how they're rewarded for that, what their ambitions are, where they
Mm-hmm.
see themselves going with their careers. As a pharmacy workforce researcher, my interest is very much in who pharmacists are and what they want to do with that pathway. And so I got my pharmacy degree from Wisconsin. I went and worked as a community pharmacist for several years, worked for a company that's called Shopco. Unfortunately, Shopco is no longer with us, but many
Mm-hmm.
of us probably remember what Shopco was. And for a number of years, they were a great place to work with because I really used my knowledge as a pharmacist and as a pharmacy manager working for Shopco. But then went to Ohio State for graduate school. That was a good place to be able to go to be able to learn the research tools
Mm-hmm.
that I needed to have to be able to do the research that I do, as well as to get more experience with teaching and educating. I had gotten some experience as a teaching assistant as an undergraduate student at Wisconsin already, but then at Ohio State, I got even more experience
Mm-hmm.
and learned what it was like to be in front of a classroom of 100 students and have to be prepared and have to help students understand how does their knowledge of this particular topic fit into a bigger picture of all of the
Yes.
things that we expect them to know as a pharmacist. As I finished up my graduate work, I had options. I could go work for the pharmaceutical industry. I could go work with a managed care organization. I could work with wholesalers like
Mm-hmm.
Cardinal or McKesson or Bergen or something like that. There were lots of options. Ultimately, I chose the academic path because I really enjoyed that ability to not just continue to do research, but to connect with
Mm-hmm.
students and to really, it felt that I could have the biggest impact on my profession and ultimately the biggest impact on patients by continuing to train and help educate the next future generations of people that are going to go into pharmacy.
I love that, Dave. And you would ultimately spend 30 plus years across three different institutions in that area of work that I know have had an impact on
Mm-hmm.
so many other colleagues that you've crossed paths with. Obviously, the thousands probably, right, of students that you worked with over the years. And
It's interesting at this point of one's career when, yeah, one naturally does kind of look back at those types of things. And I
yeah,
started adding up the numbers between the institutions I've taught at. I've been the professor of probably close to 5,000 students
yeah.
over the years. I'm editor of a textbook, and I work with several others on that book as well. That I know is used in most colleges of
Hmm.
pharmacy in the United States, and including now many colleges of pharmacy across the world. And so it's cool, kind of cool to think about how one has
Yeah.
an impact, not necessarily even just directly like we are used to with our patients, but that indirect impact, that
Hmm.
the work that we do can be used by so many people.
One of the reasons I was so excited for this interview, Dave, is that I think there's often a perception around retirement that, folks might be limping towards that line, or, begrudgingly working late in their career, or there's a lot of energy around early retirement. But often I think that's with the context of that, someone may not necessarily be enjoying the work that they're doing. And what's really interesting about your story is the great career you have had, the fulfillment and joy you had in your work, the
Mhm.
impact you had on many others, but also this excitement around, the next phase of life. And to me, like, that is what, when we talk about preferred retirement, when we talk about, what retirement may look like in the vision of like that to me is the success I know that I'm yearning for, is to have an option and choice, of course, but
Mhm.
also to look back and feel like, wow, like I love the time that I had and the impact and the opportunities I had. And you shared something really interesting on LinkedIn. You said that, quote, while I may have concluded the pharmacy educator phase of my career, I certainly don't think of myself as being done. And to borrow a phrase from Lucinda Main, someone we both know, you
Mhm.
said you're entering the preferment phase of your career. Fortunate to have the luxury of choosing what you'd like to do, who I'd like to do it with, and taking the time to figure it all out. I love that, the preferment phase. Talk to us more about what that means to you.
Thank you so much, because I feel so fortunate to be able to be at this phase of my career. And I want to share my wife Michelle, who's also a pharmacist who I met in graduate school at Ohio State. She has also started on her preferment phase as well. She was a pharmacist, worked in hospitals and outpatient oncology settings for many years, and has decided to start her preferment stage at this point with us. But no, I think when one thinks about getting to this stage in a career, I mean, there's been so much that's been rewarding and interesting about the work that I do. But like anyone, none of our career paths or jobs are perfect. They all
Hmm.
come with, sometimes things that we would just as soon not be doing, or the longer we've been doing something, we get to know ourselves pretty well.
Yeah.
And, I say to myself, well, these are things that I really like and that I'm
Hmm.
really interested in. And then there's other parts of my job that I'm doing that, well, I'm not so interested in those
Hmm.
things, and I'm just doing them because at a certain point you kind of feel you have to.
Yeah.
And I guess this is again a good position to be able to be in when one thinks about preferment. I mean, yes, I stepped off in academia, what we call the tenure track. I was
Hmm.
a tenured full professor, which in many respects is the ideal position. It's the
Hmm.
golden ring that many people go towards.
Yeah.
This idea that you have a lifetime contract, and
Hmm.
I was very fortunate to have a lifetime contract at a leading university, and was well compensated for what I did.
Hmm.
I'm very fortunate to have been in that position. That said, that if you stay in that position, you're going to keep doing all of those things essentially for the rest of your
Hmm.
career. And I just kind of said to myself, maybe not.
Hmm.
maybe there are other things I'd like to do, or there's again there's things I like doing, there's things that I don't like doing, and then there's this whole outside of
Yeah.
my job life, the things that make me me, so to speak, that I kind of wanted to think I'd like to be able to do them without feeling guilty that I should
Right.
be doing something else. And so no, I decided that this was a good point in my life to be able to make this type of change.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think no pressure, Dave, but I think you and maybe Lucinda should work on a book on the preferment phase, because I think, and we try to find this balance, but we focus so heavily on the dollars and cents, right?
Yeah.
Really important. We
Hmm.
got to have enough to cover our needs and the goals we have, whatever those may be. But we tend to overlook, both in retirement as well as throughout our careers, like what does it mean to live a rich life? Not
Yeah.
not just dollars and cents, but at the end of the day, money is a tool,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
Money is a
exactly. Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. Money is a means to an end. It is not an end in and of itself.
yeah.
It's the same as our careers in farming. Our career is we have to think of our career path as a means to an end,
Hmm.
not the end in and of itself. And again, when I step back and thought about that, I think about my family, and it was, there was difficult sometimes, especially during the pandemic. I mean, my family was back in the Midwest, in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
in Chicago, and so forth. And there was a long time where we literally couldn't travel to go
Hmm.
see them. My wife's family was in Ohio. The same thing. My wife was working at a hospital, and they literally told her, well, if you leave the state of Massachusetts to go visit your family, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks
Yeah.
before you come
Hmm.
back to work. And that just for a long time wasn't viable for
Yeah.
either of us. So we started thinking about our families. We start thinking about the things we enjoy doing. I mean, I enjoy skiing. I enjoy getting out on my bike and going on rides and that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. Um, just some of the mental type things that we all like doing and so forth, the things that us honestly make us.
Yeah.
And so I look to this point of the life that we've entered now, where it's giving us more space and
Hmm.
time to be able to do that, and not feel like, oh, I've got to do this job aspect of my
Yeah.
job or that aspect of my job. I mean, we've figured out ways to be able to manage that.
One of the things I mentioned to you before we recorded is I'm reading right now a book called Retirement Stepping Stones by Tony Hickson. We'll link to that in the show notes. And this was recommended to me by a shared colleague,
Hmm.
that really, John Sprague had said, "Hey, Tim, you got to read this book to really have perspective on what he and I were talking about at the time, which is more of this concept of life planning. Again, need the dollars and cents,
Yep.
but also what are the goals? What's the vision we have to live life well?" And Tony Hickson in this book talks about retirement not as a finish line, but how we need to be thinking about it as a halftime.
Yeah.
And I love that, because what do we do at halftime, right? You already kind of mentioned it, when our Bills and Packers play, you adjust.
Yeah.
You adjust and you have a plan. Yes, it's been informed a little bit by what's been happening, but it's a time to reset, to look ahead, and to make sure we have a plan. We don't just go out into the
Yeah.
third quarter, hope
Yep.
it's going to work out, right? So my question for you is, it's clear to me, Dave, when I hear you talking about, investment of more time with family, with,
Mhm.
the outdoors and skiing and traveling, that there's these other goals, but there's been thought and intention behind this transition. And talk us through that a little bit more, and how you and your wife got to this decision point and ultimately painted the picture of what this vision would look like.
Yeah. Um, I think for many of us, I mean, this is in some ways it's been a conversation we've thought about for a long time. I mean, we knew from this point that we started working that someday we were going to retire. We weren't just going to stay chained to our desks or to our hospitals, or universities
Mm-hmm.
for an ever and ever. So we knew that that day was going to come. We didn't necessarily know when that was going to be, but we started saving and thinking accordingly for that, knowing that it would come. And so there was an aspect of having a financial plan that we started to
Mm-hmm.
put in place. Um, keep moving forward. I'll say, like many people, we did get to the pandemic and kind of said to ourselves, as our jobs were changing and our careers were changing, are these changes we wanted to make? I mean, in some ways
Mm-hmm.
we made them because we had to, we all adjusted
Right.
and so forth. But did we want to continue down this pathway? And I think we put some thought and energy into this. And then now I'm going to say we also sat down with a financial advisor, and actually I'm going to mention just a little bit thinking about finances and, because of course there is a financial aspect to being able to make these decisions. Like I said, my wife and I had started saving, and we are savers. That's part of our culture. I remember one time you posted on one of your blogs or something, what's the most fun thing one can do when you've got some extra money? Mm-hmm. And I think I remember my comment to that post was save it. and it might not, to some people, that might not seem the most exciting thing in the world, but when I can take that money and put it in the bank, that tells me that I'm going to have that I'm going to be able to make decisions in a future based on what, having made that decision now to save that money. And it's going to give me options that I know other people might not have if they didn't save that money. Mm-hmm. So like I said, we were pretty good savers. That said, we didn't have, let's say, we didn't have a sense of when halftime was, or how we were actually going to go about making that decision. And so, in some ways, I was really fortunate that a financial planner, so to speak, somewhat fell into my lap. My parents had set up a life insurance policy for me when I was born, like many families do with their kids. And it was a whole life policy. It had a relatively small cash value, but let's just say a number of years later, somebody from that company reached out to me and said, have you thought about your retirement and retirement planning? And for years, I just kind of put them off, thinking, oh, you're just, somebody trying to sell me more insurance or something like that, and didn't pay much attention to them. But then ultimately, we just kind of, I'll give him credit for his persistence. But every year he came back and touched base, how's things going and all that kind of stuff. And then ultimately kind of said, it kind of hit me that, I could really benefit the perspective from somebody like this. Because like I said, I'd done I'm a pretty informed investor, so to speak. I'd done a pretty good job of saving and thinking about where my money was going to go and making our money work the best for us and all that kind of stuff. But that still doesn't give us necessarily a sense of, when can you say it's halftime? Right. And when can you make that decision? So, So Tom, our financial advisor, really helped us with that thought process. And I'll say I remember this very well because it was January 2021. We'd all been living through the pandemic for the better part of that year. And he just kind of sat down with us and said, well, okay, given what you've saved to this point, if you guys decided today, if you wanted to, not continue to do the jobs you're doing right now and start living off of your savings based on the lifestyle that you have, of course, the spending patterns that you have and everything. He told us essentially you could live to be 95 and you have a 95% chance of not running out of money. And we kind of thought to ourselves, wow, that's a really good thing to hear. And that, just having that conversation really kind of opened up our eyes to, well, what could we do? What are the things, not so much the things that we felt like we had to do, but what do we want to do? Where could we go from here? Yeah. And I think that's where we really started saying, okay, this is, we're going to start moving down this path. I mean, I didn't, needless to say, didn't immediately go to my boss and say, I'm leaving. We had a very good conversation about how this was going to look. And honestly, it was more than a year and a half after I had that conversation. I didn't officially retire from Northeastern until this past August. So we had that conversation. My wife had that conversation with her folks at our hospital. And then we started planning for what our next phase of our life is going to be. Landed on Denver is where we decided we wanted to be. We started going through the work of, preparing to sell our places in the Northeast and find a place to live in Colorado. And I'm going to add real estate to that mix of your financial picture that you go through in making these decisions about, what your total financial picture is. And because we've always thought of our homes not just as a place to live, but as an investment that we are going
Yeah.
to buy and hopefully sell for more than we paid for them at some point. Um, but we went ahead and started making those decisions and putting that into motion. And as of last March or this past March, we made the move from Boston to Denver, and have been very happy that we made that move. It's worked out very well for us.
So let me ask for, I suspect some pre-retirees that are listening thinking, like Dave, I love the story and the journey. Maybe they even look at their numbers and say, I think it's there, but then they are living the reality of 8%, 9%
Mm-hmm.
inflation, market volatility. There's so much, discussion out there of when you retire and what the market's doing, can have a long-term impact on returns and how you mitigate that risk around retirement. So talk us through for you. Obviously, we can plan scenarios. I don't know if any of
Yeah.
us were planning for this type of inflation
Well, I mean,
volatility.
that's a really good point, and believe me, I've had some thoughts about what we've gone through, and in terms of the timing. I mean,
Yeah.
when I think about what the environment was back in early 2021, where in some ways, yeah, the stock market was starting to come back pretty strong at that time.
Yeah.
Inflation was still pretty low. Interest rates were really low. One of the things, needless to say, we go into an environment now. One of the things my financial advisor advised us of, and I can't begin to tell you what a good piece of advice this was to be reasonably liquid going into what essentially will be your first year of. I'll keep using the word preferment because I'm just
Mhm.
not convinced that I'm retired. So, but when he said basically you want to have a year's worth of spending money. Um, Liquid such that you don't have to sell stocks in order to
Mm. Mhm.
be able to have money to live on, essentially. And I'll say this: it was actually relatively easy for us to be able to do that, not just with some of our financial instruments that we had been using. We used for a variety of instruments. I
Mhm.
mean, from equity to bonds and other
Mhm.
types of things that everyone else uses. But again, this was the aspect of buying and selling real estate. We um, owned two properties outright in Massachusetts, one in Massachusetts, one in Maine. And when we sold those, we were able to purchase a home in Denver as well as have a little bit of
Mhm.
cash on hand. And having that cash on hand has made things a lot easier. Now, no one
Mhm.
likes 8-9% inflation, of course, and it's certainly taken a little bit of a bite out of that cash at hand.
Sure.
But it's also saved us from having to go and sell stocks at a time when
Yeah.
stocks have taken, like in the past year, what, a 20%
Mhm.
dive. The one thing thinking about stocks, I mean, I have confidence that the markets will come back. I mean, we've seen markets go down before and
Yep.
they've always come back. And I, looking at our economy and the things that underpin it, the market will come back. I don't know exactly when and how it will. If I knew that, I probably wouldn't be doing the preferment thing. I'd be making a lot more money as a financial
You would,
advisor.
yes.
but but anyway, but I have that confidence that it will, and
Yeah.
with that confidence, I know that essentially the way we have things structured, this
Mhm.
combination of different assets that we're utilizing to be able to make these decisions. It's not just one type of asset
Yeah.
class that you look at. It's not just your 401k, for example. There's a variety of different
Yes.
ways that we can get to what we're doing. And another thing, just again to think about this preferment thing too. I mean, preferment does not mean not working or no
That's
income.
right.
I mean, it's likely going to mean different types of things. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll say as I've moved into this phase, I'm doing what most of us would call consulting work. I'm
Mm-hmm.
working with a couple of different universities right now. One on some teaching stuff, one on some more administrative stuff, helping them deal with some issues that they're dealing with and so forth. And again, just utilizing the expertise that I've developed over the
Yeah.
years to be able to do some things. I mean, it's bringing in a small amount of income, definitely not as much as I was making when I was
Mm-hmm.
working full time, but that's okay. I don't need
Yep.
as much as I was working full time. My wife's in the same position. I mean, she is a pharmacist. She could go back and work as a pharmacist. I mean, especially right now, there's lots of
Mm-hmm.
demand. She could. I don't actually know if that's really what she wants to do. She's been telling me that her next job may be working at a Trader Joe's,
Mm-hmm.
and for her, that again, that's could be the perfect thing for her.
Store
So
discount bonus, right?
exactly. Believe me, that comes in handy.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's this sense of
Yeah.
you know. My wife and I were both very like money pharmacists. We were
Mm-hmm.
well compensated people. We were not hurting
Yeah.
for income, but I took a step back and said, I don't need or even want to live my life where I have to depend on having that level of
Yeah.
income for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I've just looked at it and said I can do the things I want to do and live a very good life on not having that
Mm-hmm.
level of income.
Yeah, and that takes me down. I've been thinking as you're talking, you've said several things that have caught my attention. Your somewhat inherent behavior around saving. Really this mindset around if I had an option to spend extra money, I'd save it because I can
Yeah.
think about the future growth and
Mhm.
delayed
Yeah.
gratification. Into the future, and those are a sneak peek into a mindset around how we think about and how we handle our money. And it feels like as you're talking that this is something that has been ingrained in you for a long time, either
Yeah.
through personal interest, research, family experience, whatever may be the
I
case.
we were talking a little bit about this before we came online. I mean, it's almost fair to say I've been thinking about this essentially from the time I was born, because I was born into a family of savers. Essentially, I
Mm-hmm.
like to use the example of my folks. Again, like I said, my father was an accountant who went to work in the dairy industry in Wisconsin, and my mother was a teacher. So they, between the two of them, they had a decent middle class income, of course, and everything. But again, always saved. Part of it was to be able to save to send myself and my two brothers to college, which again, I cannot begin to tell you how fortunate I was to be able to have parents who had saved for our college education and then
Mm-hmm.
gave us that ability to be able to start our lives
Yes.
without the debt that I know that many of our students have today as they're getting that education.
Mm-hmm.
So that again, I know that I was so fortunate, and I'm very thankful to my parents for that. But even more than that, it created a mindset in me that I knew I saw what they did to be able to do, not only to provide a college education for me and my brothers, but to create the life for themselves as well.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad also retired at the age of 57.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's cool.
now, and again, retirement for him wasn't retirement. It was, and I'll still say is, because my dad's 82 years old and is still doing this.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much preferment. My dad was, he's like I said, he was an accountant who had always specialized in tax. And while he was working in the dairy industry, he started doing people's taxes, during tax season. And then when he decided he didn't want to work in the dairy industry anymore, he just said, "Well, what am I going to do?" And so he's just essentially his side gig has been doing taxes, and he still has about 200 clients to this day, including
In his
myself
80s, right? You said?
in his 80s.
Awesome.
It is that, I'll say for this, it's that great mental thing for him. It
Yeah.
keeps him very engaged. Matter of
Mm-hmm.
fact, like, every year, this time of year, actually, he goes back to tax school. It's like a 1 week, seminar that he goes and learns about, like, okay, what are all the new tax codes and all the new things that he needs to be able to work with people as a tax advisor on, and all that kind of stuff. And so every year he goes to does that, and every year he shares it with me and tells me what I should be doing and how I should be preparing myself, financially, and that kind of stuff. But again, I just give so much credit to my parents, because
Mm-hmm.
they had, instilled in me mindsets about the value of saving, and about, just think about your finances really is just another one of our tools in our
Yes.
toolbox, so to
Yes.
speak. It's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. We
Mm-hmm.
have money, and we manage our money because we want to be able to live a life that's meaningful to us.
Mm-hmm.
And however that is, I'm not here to judge how one spends their money or
Yep.
what one does with their money. So long as you've got the money to be able to do it, that's our choices. It's your choices to be able to do that how you wish. But it's just, having those tools and having that mindset to be able to make
Mm-hmm.
those decisions has been, a really great thing. I remember, probably likely somebody we both know, Karen Keir. I went to
Yes.
graduate school with Karen,
Mm-hmm.
back at Ohio State. She introduced me back in, I want to say this was probably 1990, 1991, to this little financial tool called Quicken. Um, and I have to think back in 1990, 91, I don't know if you remember the Macintosh computers that
Oh
were
yeah.
literally like these
Yeah.
cubes.
Yep.
And so I got like one of the first versions of Quicken for Mac.
That's
That
awesome.
was, and started, honestly, it was this way of tracking your
Mm-hmm.
finances, tracking how you use your money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, doing the checkbook thing, but doing it on, the register on Quicken and everything. And then the fact that it keeps track of everything. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm pretty proud to say now, what is it now, 30 some years later, I have I still use Quicken to this day, and I have a record of my financial transactions
Mm-hmm.
that goes back over 30 years. And, that's been valuable to me. I mean, I can't say that I go back and look at every transaction from
Yeah.
1992, but it does tell me when, let's say, for when my financial advisor wanted to know, okay, what kind of money do you need to live on,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak?
You have
Well,
that
I,
data.
I had
Yeah.
that data. I could
Yeah.
get those answers relatively
Yes.
easily. And that's been, again, so always, again, one of my bits of advice is, whether it be Quicken or any of the other tools out there that help us get
Mm-hmm.
that picture of ourselves financially, utilize those tools. I say I probably put, um, 1 to 2 hours every other week
Mm-hmm.
into
Mm-hmm.
managing my
Yes.
various aspects of my finances. And for me, that's always been time very well spent.
Yes. Yeah, and the consistency and compound effect of that is
Yeah.
huge,
Yeah.
over time. And it's interesting, you're talking about tools and Quicken. Like here in 2022, obviously there are more tools than
Oh, yeah.
ever,
Yep.
apps,
Yep.
that will help us, software tools. But I would argue some of the mindset and behavior is getting harder and harder, just because of all the things that are competing for it.
Our
So
time and attention.
yeah,
Yeah.
tracking
Yeah.
easier, execution, I think, is even becoming a little bit harder. Let me ask you one final question. I know we have, some new practitioners that are listening. You obviously work closely with students and new grads
Mhm.
as well, but folks that are feeling the headwind financially, despite obviously making a good income,
Yeah.
having a good potential for their income into the future, but they're facing large student loan debts. They're looking at potentially the housing market and wanting to buy a
Yeah.
home in this market. Inflation. Tim and Dave, you're telling me I need to start saving early and max out my retirement account. I need an emergency fund. I need to get rid of my credit card debt.
Yeah.
Like, it's just overwhelming, right? What
Mhm.
what what advice would you have for those folks about some of the early
Yeah.
wins and behaviors and habits that they can employ.
And you said it, I think you nailed it right there. Early wins, one step at a time. Rather
Mm,
than getting overwhelmed by all of these things that are hitting you, focus on one thing that you can do, that you can impact. Yeah, a good example would be like my wife. When my wife and I, shortly after we got married, she did have a little bit of college loan debt, and she was somebody. She had gotten a bachelor's degree. She went to graduate school, and then she decided to go to pharmacy school.
mhm,
So it took her a little longer to go down that path, and she had a little bit of financial debt. We decided to focus, to prioritize on paying down that debt. It was,
mhm.
the highest interest debt that we had, and we did the things that we had to, which in the short term, yeah, like everyone, probably meant making some sacrifices. There were some vacations we didn't go on. There
Mhm.
was, maybe we bought the used car rather than the new car or something like that. There's all the little things that one does to be able to then have a little bit more money to
Mhm.
put in the areas that you want to prioritize. So, whether it be paying down student loan debt or saving to make a down payment on a house or all the other things. I mean, the great news is, as pharmacists, we are, relatively high income folks.
Right.
We have access to funds. It's just a matter of how we decide to utilize
Yeah.
those funds.
Yeah.
So but yeah, focus on that one thing. Don't get overwhelmed by
Mhm.
all of the different things and thinking to myself, oh gosh, there's so much going on here. How am I going to handle
Mhm.
all of this? You can handle things. Do thing one thing at a time, and then use that leverage, that
Yeah.
success you have in doing one thing, to then go do the next thing.
Yeah, I love that, Dave. I talk a lot with new practitioners about that early momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And, while any one financial decision or win may not feel monumental in the moment, it's the compound effect and
Yeah.
the momentum that comes from
Yeah.
that over time. And, there's a natural excitement of like, okay, small win, what's next?
Yeah.
Another win, what's next?
Yeah.
What's next? And you look back 3, 5, 10 years later, and some of those behaviors start to really compound and add up over
Oh,
time. So
that's the one thing that the whole. I remember back. Heck, I was thinking in high school, you learn about compound interest, and
yeah,
the idea that what interest bills on interest bills on
yeah.
interest, and again, I think about 30, 40 years into my career span, so to speak.
Mhm.
The decisions we made very early on are definitely paying
Mhm.
dividends today, and how they do things. Now that said, I also don't want to, turn off or upset your readers who maybe aren't that young anymore and anything, or maybe thinking to themselves, gee, I didn't do that when I
Sure.
was, 25 years old. What am I going to do? It's never too late to
That's right.
start,
That's right.
and there's a lot that one can do to make good
Mhm.
financial decisions. Even, another really good habit I picked up from my parents is, while I have credit cards and use them liberally. It's with the sense of never, my dad just instilled in me, you will pay off your credit card in full every month. You will
Mhm.
never carry a balance on these
Mhm.
cards. And that's, again, always just been part of my mindset, that
Mhm.
I use a credit card. I get that bill out of it and actually, I don't even get a bill. Obviously, it's everything's electronic these days, and honestly,
Mhm.
it's automatically withdrawn from my checking account. So,
Mhm.
but I, um, essentially, I use the credit that's available. Credit is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not one
Right.
of these people who will say never use credit cards,
Yep.
or don't take out interests, and
Mhm.
don't take out loans. I mean, heck, a lot of us, the reality is we wouldn't go to college. We wouldn't, be
Yep.
able to buy a home if we didn't
Yep.
take out debt. Debt can and is a good thing. It
Mhm.
just has to be used in balance with
Yep.
everything else, because if it's not in balance, it will take over in a not so good way.
Mhm. Well, this has been fantastic. I knew it would, and it's delivered, and I'm excited to get
Cool.
this out to our community. And Really excited, Dave, for you in this next phase of your preferment. I think I'm going to
I'm
adopt that term. So
that's a great thing. I do think Lucinda and I should get together
you should.
and write a book on preferment. But as always, one of the great things about being an educator, as you know, Tim, is you. It's not just the impact you make on students when they're in your classroom, it's the impact you see as their
Yes.
careers move forward. And I've
Yeah.
been so blessed and fortunate to be able to stay in touch with many of my former students and not only see the successes they're having and the things that they're achieving in their lives, but to be able to share what we're all doing and
Yeah.
so forth. And to that end, I hope some of my former students are out there and are seeing this. And I would love to be able to stay in touch. If there are things that I can share more with your listeners about,
Mm-hmm.
how one prepares to get to the point in this life, what the things that decisions that we make as we get to this point. I will still say, keeping on our football analogy, it's still halftime. And my wife and I are sitting in the locker room still making those plans for what we're going to go out and do in the third quarter. And just like, I'm offering advice to some folks, I'm also appreciating advice from people who have been down this pathway ourselves, and whether it be books or whether it be other folks that have made similar decisions to what we have. There's a lot to learn. And to me, that's always been the best part about the academic path is it's not the teaching, it's the learning. And
Absolutely.
And the more that we can learn, the better off we'll all be.
Well, that's great. We'll link to in the show notes your LinkedIn if folks aren't already connected with you. I know that's a way they can reach out. So, all right. Thanks again, Dave. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it a lot. Thank you very much.
As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding material should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.